Here's the secret. What companies don't understand is that in order to be very effective in their multicultural marketing, they really need to be very good at their DEIAB policies internally, because you cannot be externally what you are not internally.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of I Have Something to Say, where subject matter experts are unafraid and unapologetic about sharing their perspectives regarding issues that impact our lives. They speak up because basically they give a shit. So if you're tired of canned answers and want to finally hear real people cut through the BS and talk about real issues, this is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Sami Heyman Marrero from Urbander, and behind our mixer is our producer, Chris Majoka from UdoU. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of I Have Something to Say. And I've been dying to have this conversation with my friend Joe Lugo because I feel like he's a unicorn, and we'll be able to compare notes, right? Because we work in the same space. He's the CEO of J3 Creations, and also the founder of a nonprofit, P3 Creations. But for the for-profit, he focuses on consulting services, helping organizations become culturally sensitive and really embed diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging practices into the way they operate in the communities that they work in. Also working a lot with the faith-based community in meeting, right, the needs of marginalized communities. He's an author, speaker, trainer, and his book, When Leadership Meets Diversity, is going to have a new iteration, which is going to be bigger and better. But really, Joe, welcome. I'm so excited to have you. Thank you for taking the time to have this conversation with me.
Thank you so much. Anytime I'm invited to have this conversation, I love it. This is my passion. And then when it's you, even more so. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You give a lot back to the community too. I mean, I forgot to mention that you're also the vice president of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce of Pinellas County. I mean, so you're very, very much, woven, right? You've woven your whole life into what it is to giving back and really being a guide to organizations from corporate to nonprofit to community-based organizations, in terms of this quest to find parity, right, and equity, and mitigate disparities. And so I know that the topic that we're gonna address is the differences, right, or how a multicultural marketing and advertising agency is distinct or different from a DEI, right, and belonging and sustainability and accessibility expert. But I wanted to first ground the conversation by learning about how did you land in this space? How did you, basically delve into this equity work?
So, for the story, let's see, how do we condense this? So let's start off. I grew up in a very marginalized and underserved community in Brooklyn, New York. And for me, getting up on Fridays, Saturday mornings, going and standing online for the big block of cheese and the milk and the bread, that was normal for me. I had no idea that there was another world outside of the world I grew up in. I didn't know I was poor. I didn't know about racism. It was either you were Latin or black, and the anomaly was the occasional white person that I saw. So when I got to high school, I realized that the world was very different than what I thought. And so I began to experience a lot of different things. I didn't know what they were. I didn't know what they were called, but I know that they were not justified. They were a form of injustice. And I started seeing it in other people as well. And then when I entered the workforce, I really, really saw it. I mean, the experiences that I had with people. And I will say this, not everybody who does things to make you feel marginalized means it. A lot of it is unconscious. It doesn't make it right, but it's unconscious and needs to be brought into the conscious and needs to be educated. So, a lot of the work that we do, we start from the place of unconscious bias because it doesn't raise up walls for people. And so, as I grew and developed, um, I got into I said to myself, well, the corporate world is really messed up. So I decided to get into the world of religion and clergy, and found out that it wasn't any better there.
Mm.
Actually, it affected me more than in the corporate world because supposedly church and religion, God is love and we love everyone and we accept everyone, but that's not really the case. And so one of the things that I was able to do in the time that I was there was I really brought some awareness. We created Spanish ministries, deaf ministries, Brazilian ministries. We brought in cultures. We tried to change the way that things were done because if you look at Sunday morning is probably the most segregated hour in our country. And this is what
Mm.
I mean. I mean that when we go into church, we worship a certain way that's for a certain crowd. We preach messages that is a certain way, targeted at a certain crowd. Our activities, our environment, our leadership, what leadership looks like a certain way. And so, that's to me, that doesn't reflect the message that we're trying to portray. So we worked on some of those things. And then finally my season there was up and I decided to in 2016, I created J3 Creations, and J3 Creations it started off as like a publishing house for my books. But I was being called and invited to speak on leadership and DEI and all these things, and I realized, wait a minute, um, I probably should get paid for this. and so that's where J3 was born, and we stepped into it. And that was in the second half of my life. And I really believe that the second half of my life is about building a legacy, one that's worth picking up for someone who comes after me, so that this work doesn't die when I'm not here anymore and that it continues moving forward. And so, a DEIB, uh, diversity, equity, inclusion, access, and belonging. Because it all started with diversity and then diversity and inclusion, and then we added equity to it, and there was still something missing. So I said, well, these are all great concepts and all great things, but if we don't have access to it, and if we don't create an environment of belonging, all of that goes to waste, really, because that's the result side. And so, leadership is also a thing that I'm really passionate about, and I believe that both of them go together. So one of the things that we're doing is we're creating programs to show people that if you're going to be true leader, a leader, you have to lead in all capacities, and this is one of the ones that society needs the most. So that's how kind of all of this came about, and then P3 Creations, real creative name, right? It's just basically the way that we give back to our society, to our community. Um, P3 is more local. J3, we can go anywhere where we have clients all across the country. And then my brother-in-law and I saw a need here in Pinellas County because Pinellas County, interesting little county. It's not. It's a little different than the rest of the Tampa Bay area, the greater Tampa Bay area. And so we saw a need. We saw a huge need for bringing some kind of focus. There's lots of different chambers in Tampa, but not in Pinellas County. There's never been one. So
Mm.
2.5 years ago, we decided to step out and founded the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce of Pinellas County, and it has been, wow, quite a journey. As a matter of fact, that could probably be my full-time job if I allowed it to be. And so we've been able to serve the business community. We've found out a lot. We've learned a lot. One of the things that we've learned about our Hispanic, Latino, Latina community is a business community is that they're very good at the core. So if they have a salon or a restaurant or an accounting or real estate, whatever it is, they're good at the core, but they're not so good at the other parts: administration, business planning,
Mm.
profit and loss statements, insurance, banking relationships, all these things. And so we saw there was a huge need for this, and that's what we've been focusing on.
That's fantastic. And so then that coupled um with your efforts through P3, right? Creations, the nonprofit, in terms of helping disenfranchised people realize the power that they have and the ability they have to change the narrative, right, goes back to your beginnings too, right, of exposing them, and right, and so I see how it's all interconnected. And when I, started with saying that you've really woven, you're a weaver, right, you've been weaving all of these lived experiences with your, corporate background, with your community service, with your faith. All of it is all in the
It
same.
it is. It really is. It's really it's created who I am. So all those things are a big part of who I am. They're my values. They're my morals. They're my integrity, and that's the most important thing for me. Purpose, right? So
Yes,
yes.
totally. And I got to tell you something, that was really powerful what you mentioned, that Sunday mornings, I wrote it down. Sunday mornings is the most segregated hour in the US. Wow. That to me is very powerful, because and it really resonates with me, because since 2016 specifically I stopped going to church. I
A lot
haven't
of
stepped
people
foot.
have.
Yeah, I haven't, because I just felt I couldn't be in a space where I didn't know if the people next to me, where they really stood, right, in terms of humanity and God's love and all of these messages or learnings, right, that we're supposed to actually act upon, right. And so then I'm like, tu sabes que, I know myself, right, and although, I try to exercise emotional intelligence for the most part, I'm like, I just don't need to be in, in a worship in a worship environment, right? And then someone's gonna say the wrong thing or whatever, and I don't know how. I want to just step away, and do my own thing, right? With direct relationship with the big one. Yeah.
Yeah, I can tell you that we tend to over spiritualize things. And you
Yeah.
mentioned a word that I think is very spiritual, and that's humanity, right? It is about loving our neighbor. And when the church looks at diversity, here's what I see. Not every
Hmm.
church, not every religion, but for the most part, they say diversity. So to me, what I see is a whole bunch of salt, and somebody just sprinkled a little bit of pepper in it, and then they
Hmm.
say we are diverse, and I say to myself, no, you just sprinkled a little bit of pepper in your salt. What are you doing to address the needs of how other people reach a higher power or reach God, however they defined it? What are you doing for services? How does your leadership look like? Does it reflect your
Hmm.
who you're trying to reach, or is it a good old boys club? I mean, these are hard questions to ask, and the church is not real good at asking themselves these questions. They want to think that they're doing the right thing, and I put that in quotes, but the right thing does not sound like a lot of what I hear churches preaching and doing. So anyway, I don't want to go down that
No, when
horse.
yeah, I know, but I just wanted to mention that it resonated with me, right? And so that I get it, right? But by the same token, a lot has happened in the last, what, 3 years, right? I think triggered largely by nothing short of the modern day lynching of a black man caught on camera, George Floyd's untimely, tragic death kind of ignited, right, this awareness, right, and this movement to really, like, enough, right, like people were fed up. Black Lives Matter. You found a lot of even professionals, right, finally exercising their voice, stepping in, elevating these conversations. And so all of a sudden we see the business community really responding, right, to the consumer demand. Check this out, right, for justice and for equity and for talking about these hard issues. And so I've seen a lot of players, right, in the business community really stepping in, and I think not really being able to differentiate what multicultural approaches are, compared to diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, belonging initiatives, right? And so please humor me, right? And let's get into it because I quite frankly, it's one of my pet peeves, right? When when we're walking into these spaces and I see people that for decades have been working in the multicultural spaces, and that's wonderful, right? That's wonderful, but not necessarily in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, especially the equity piece, right? Because business and social justice for a lot of our communities, and I'm going to speak specifically about the Latino community because that's what we are, right? So let's focus on that. Businesses in the Latino community and activism like civil rights, engagement, equity, justice, looking for parity and that kind of stuff, right? It haven't really coincided much. Yes, do we have Latinos that have been activists and leaders in the community? But yes, it's at a very grassroots level, not necessarily the business community. Would you agree with that?
I do agree with that. Let me just start by saying that diversity, equity, inclusion, access, and belonging efforts have been around for a very long time. Multiculturalism or multicultural marketing um, has been around, not as popular or not as focused as DE and I movements, but in the world and the era of social media, when you can capture on camera and distribute it throughout the whole world, there's a certain level of awareness that happens. And then we couple that with a time of pandemic where it just makes it very dire straits. So people decided to step out, and those who really want to make a difference took this as an opportunity to really start bringing awareness to all these things. And as a Latino, as you put it, a unicorn, a multicultural person. My background is like, all over. I have a little bit of everything in me. For me, it happened earlier, but during that time, I learned a lot. I learned the psychology behind it. I learned a lot of different things that really bring impact, how to bring forward this social justice, how to and all agendas aside, right? Because this is where it gets muddy when people start to insert their own personal agendas into the situation. So I think that during that time, what's happened is that, and we'll take this back to the business sense, is that businesses started going, well, okay, so now the consumer is changing because this has come to light, and we have seen that there is a ever so slightly, but it is happening. There is a shift in the balance of power and the voice, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
you started showing stats that by 2040, most of the people in the United States are going to look like you and me, right? Because of
Mm-hmm.
mixing of cultures and the intermarriages, the interracial marriages, and so on and so forth. So they started doing studies, and they started going, well, who's buying? Where is the shift coming from? And they started looking, and across the United States, we're looking at anywhere between 29 and 40% of the consumer market. The economic buying power is in the hands of the Latino, the minorities, and those folks that are coming down. Here in Pinellas County, one of the things that we discovered is that the buying power is at 11%. And I have a feeling that it's a lot more, just that we don't always want to be counted for lots of different reasons. And so this has caused this idea of multiculturalism marketing, where they're saying to them, these businesses are saying, hey, our customer is not the same anymore. Our customer's changing and the buying power is shifting. So how do we get to these folks to get business, right? And so multicultural marketing comes in different levels, whether it's inspired by profits and income and what can come in revenue, or is it really inspired by the true, I want to really authentically and sincerely reach this market that has power. I want to recognize them. I want to bring them up to the forefront, and I want to create products that really enhances their lives and their purpose. So, that's where that comes from. And then you have the other side, which is the DE&I, right? So the multicultural marketing focuses on how do we reach customers with culture, right? This culture, how do we dig in? How do we find out what is culture? How is it different? Multicultural, now that's the big thing, right? So it's no longer
Yeah.
in that pocket. Now we have these pockets that are crossing. And so that's what's happening. And so it's changing the rules of the game. So multicultural marketing is really understanding the culture that you serve and how to market to them. But when we talk about the DEIAB, we're talking about people who start off looking at things from an individual standpoint: race, um, gender, religion, age, all these things. And the idea behind it is to bring forth an awareness, to bring forth change, to bring forth equity, to build that space. And so I think that a lot of times we try to separate the two, but I really think the two work best when they're combined, when they work together. Um, and so, that's what I'm seeing right now. That's kind of a lot of the things that I've been doing. So you get called in, hey, we want to talk about DE&I, and then I go in and I look at everything and I go, well, what do you understand about the culture of your company? Well, this is our culture. No, that's not what I mean. I mean, what do you understand about the culture of the people that work in your company?
Right.
And then
Exactly.
you start to kind of marry these two things together to produce the result.
Exactly. Exactly. So I think that focus, right, is that what we're talking about here is that, from a multicultural marketing and advertising standpoint, it's to connect with consumers, but outwardly for companies, organizations, governments, whoever. But the DEI expertise comes in handy to prepare the system, right, or the organization to be able to engage properly and receive, right, these consumers, employees, work with the communities that they're embedded in, right, that they're headquartered in, and really, and even with the vendor community, right, that learn how to create this sense of inclusion and also provide access, right? So that way their lived experiences with you as a vendor, as a community partner, as an employee, right? And as a consumer are equitable across the board. So that's, and you're absolutely right. I mean, I think you're a unicorn. I think we're a unicorn too, right? I'm a unicorn too, because we can easily navigate in these two spaces and know how to marry them as well. Like you, I fell into equity and diversity and inclusion also organically, right? 14 years ago. Because I agree with you. This has been, after leaving the media industry, the marketing, where I got that experience, and started the agency, we started helping hospitals, right? Where if you don't practice equity, people can have really negative outcomes, right? And so that's to me was at that moment just something new I was implementing, right? And I thought it was marketing, multicultural marketing. Yeah, we're doing cultural competency training, and no, it's different. That's the DEI and belonging piece. Yeah,
Sure. Sammy,
yeah,
I couldn't agree with you more. You mentioned a couple things, right? So you mentioned equity and you mentioned healthcare. And so
yeah.
healthcare, you can market to the Hispanic community. And again, but if you don't make the product that you're offering accessible, um, you don't build equity, because a lot of people in our culture, in the Latino, Latina, Hispanic culture, we can speak English, but we don't know what medical English is, or we don't
Mm-hmm.
understand what accounting English is, or policy or regulations. We can have a conversation in English. And so when hospitals and organizations and companies market, they forget that piece, right? And so they market, they do their graphics, they do their campaigns, but what they forget is that after you do that, now you have to make this thing accessible. And what does that mean to the culture you're marketing to? So if you want to campaign and market culturally, you have to really understand how to make that equitable. And then the other piece to it is if you're going to market, and I know that most minorities are this way, but especially us as Latinos, we're about relationships. So throwing a lot of pictures and commercials and things like that, they're great. They get my curiosity, they grab my attention. But then are we in a relationship? Because we don't really do business with people that we can't find some way to identify where we see ourselves and there is a relationship, right? um, and so that's changing the way that business is being done, that marketing is being done, and the only way to bridge that gap is the DEIAB space. That's the part that bridges everything together, that helps organizations change policy, change the way they do business, change the way they do internal business, how they handle their internal and external customers, so on and so on. And really just understanding the pulse of what they're doing and who they're doing it for and why, which is probably the
Right.
root reason.
Exactly. Absolutely. Absolutely. It was so it's and it goes beyond the language, right? Beyond just providing resources in English and in Spanish, right? It's really helping in the case of hospitals, for example, the clinical and non-clinical staff, right? Understand the dynamics in Latino, in Latino patients, for example, right? And why they're behaving a certain way. So for example, this is this is just one of so many examples. So the HIPAA policy, right? So one thing is to say no, you can't share this information, right? Because if there's a crisis, everybody in the family has to be in the know. That's just how we do, right? Because that's how we support each other. I mean, pero qué dijo y cuándo, and everybody wants to talk to the doctor. Everybody wants to be in the know, basically. And you just can't. But for a long time it was just discarding people. He says no, you can't, no, without explaining the why behind it. And so, because in our countries it's like todo el mundo, everybody shows up, everybody's there to help, right? It's like all hands on deck, because we need to, from praying to doing the 24-hour shifts and making sure the patient's not in the hospital alone, right? Our loved ones, there's a process, right? We have our own process, right? In terms of caregiving. And so those clashes here in the US, healthcare system, they don't necessarily understand them. And hospitals can be offensive, right? If they don't understand these nuances and don't have education as part of that engagement process with the patient, and it's part of patient-centered care. And so anyway, and so they would tick off, right? I'm talking about, a couple of decades, they would tick off patients and their family. Pero como que no puedo? How come I can't talk to the doctor, right? Because the tia, the auntie wants to talk to, and so then it becomes an issue. And then when they have the patient satisfaction, right, surveys, upon exit they get low scores, get less funding, because you get the funding, the government funding, based on your patient satisfaction. And so then this is a business imperative too, right? And I think people don't sometimes connect those dots, but that's why it's important to understand the multicultural aspect, but from a DEI and belonging perspective. Does, right? I mean,
Well,
any examples you could give, maybe in another type of industry?
I mean, just for an example, right? And just real quick on the healthcare, I guess they don't understand how insulting and disrespectful it is to tell the mother of a son that they're treating that you cannot access his information and we cannot tell you anything about your son. That is, that's a smack in the face, right?
Yeah,
A lot of times
exactly.
we take that a step further, right? We go into business and we we start to target market, sectors or individuals, and we don't understand how even the way we dress or the way we eat or the way we go to restaurants, it's very different, and every culture has its niches and nuances that they have, right? And so when we begin to market, yes, we're marketing generally, but what are the specifics? What are the targets? And even more, if you dig in a little bit more in the micro sector, what about where you are? How is this community different than the other one, right? Because we look at the Latin community, the Hispanic community, but inside of that, well, Sammy, you know
I know.
how confusing that can be, right? We have Central American, South American, we have Caribbean, we have the people from Spain, we have people that are mixed with Portugal and Brazilian, and just for example, Puerto Ricans, right? Puerto Ricans, who hasn't landed in Puerto Rico over the last 200 years and left their influence? So what are we? We're a mix of so many different people and cultures that have stopped by the island, and when they look at us, they just see, oh, you're Spanish or you're Hispanic, just like everybody else. No, we're not. Yes, we are Hispanic, but no, we're not like everybody else. So these are the kind of things that by ignoring them, we disrespect, and when we disrespect, we disconnect, and when we disconnect, you're not going to get business from these folks. And so the part that is missing in multicultural marketing is, I believe, is the equity. Diversity in itself really just means that we're acknowledging that people are different. Without the other pieces, it's okay, great, we're different. What are we
Yeah.
going to do, right? So I
Yeah.
think multicultural marketing really has to focus on that other piece, the equity, building inclusion, building access, building belonging. How do we do that, right? And there is a way to do that.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's because the targets are different, right? So we talked about focus, now we're talking about target, and you're absolutely right. And while the Latino population here in the US is not monolithic, right? There are certain universal, right? There's some areas, I mean, because we that ties us and binds us, right? And there are universal messages that will resonate with us, be the familia, right? Our love for culture and tradition, our respect for elders, right? Our gender roles, right? Although that's changing a little bit with the newer generation. Familismo, the sense of family that we need to, make sure that we connect at that more intimate, deeper level before we do business with you. Just so many things. So all of those things are important to target to specific Latino audiences. So if you want to really segment, right? If you're doing like a campaign in the West Coast, so you want to maybe be very Mexican American heavy, right? If you're in the East Coast, maybe very Caribbean Latino, heavy or whatever. But from a DEI standpoint, going back to humanity, right? It's more all encompassing, and the target is human beings.
I agree, and here's the secret, and I probably shouldn't be giving this away because now I'm going to lose this part of the trainings that I do. But here's the secret: what companies don't understand is that in order to be very effective in their multicultural marketing, they really need to be very good at their DEIAB policies internally, because you cannot be externally what you are not internally. And so a lot of times marketing campaigns fail because you have a certain uh, people group marketing to a different people group. That doesn't work real well. So
Mm-mm.
internally, you have to become that what you wish to attract. And that's where I think we fail a lot of times. That's probably the biggest disconnect between DE&I and multicultural marketing, is that we go out there, we think we understand, but you would have a better perspective if internally you look like the people you're trying to serve and attract.
Absolutely. And so that goes into the point of context, right? And industry. A multicultural marketing firm, right? Or advertising agency is focused on that external mostly, right? On targeting their forte is marketing and advertising. That's the department, right? Whereas DEI is again, more in corporate, nonprofit, government, education, healthcare, and it's embedded in the processes, policies, systems, and in the corporate culture, right? In the organizational culture, which is different from culture like tradition and
Sure,
that
sure.
heritage, right?
Yeah. It has to be part of their DNA in order to
Right.
reach the DNA they want to reach.
Right,
So it's really
exactly. And so,
important.
what do the outcomes look like, right? So, from a marketing standpoint, you get more, you attract, you connect, right? More effectively or disconnect, depending on how good you are. Because if you suck at it, then you can. I love that you said that disrespect is disconnect. Yes, I love that. Yes, so you're absolutely right. It could go either way. But would you say that the outcomes from embedding DEI into your processes would be the more effective way to um,
It is absolutely the more effective way, but I
to
take it a step
engage? Yeah.
further. It
Mm-hmm,
is
mm-hmm,
necessary. It's necessary. People, here's the thing. So when you grab my attention with a culturally focused campaign, you have my attention. Now the next step that I'm going to do is, okay, great. You have my attention. That sounds really good. Now I'm going to look inside your company. Who is the leaders? What is it that you do inside? What is your makeup? What do the people look like, right? And this is one of the things that I see when we're trying to attract top talent. So you know that top talent no longer comes from the United States. A lot of top talent comes from other countries that don't look like people in the United States. And the
mm-hmm,
power has shifted where they decide where they want to go, right? And so, you have people who are very qualified and they can decide where I'm going to take this company, that company, that company. You know what's the deciding factor? And studies have shown that it's not salary anymore. It is, do I see myself in that company? And if I see
mm-hmm,
myself in that company, then that's who I'm going to work for. If I continue to see myself in that company, I'm going to stay there for a long time. But the employees no longer are subject to what's available. They can pick and choose, and a lot of
mm-hmm.
companies are suffering because they can't attract top talent. And when you can't attract top talent, you can't put out a top product. And then we can go down the line from there. But this is really important,
Exactly.
really important.
It really is, and considering that the U.S. What's the figure? Wait, because I have it in my brain. From the 2010 census to the 2020 census, in those 10 years, the US experienced a growth of 276% of people that identified as multiracial.
And that's yeah,
276% increase,
that's where
and
that
that's
that's
because of marriage. Okay, and there's several reasons I feel, and you tell me what you think. I think obviously because of relationships, right? Marriage, whether on paper or because with your significant other, right? People that have come together and have had multiracial families, right? And have come together. That's one. But then also I also feel that there were a lot of ethnic people, right, in el closet, like a lot of Latinos, for example, that are fair skinned that might have been like Latino incognitos, right? My husband used to be one of those, right? That he tried to stay on the down low because he grew up in a neighborhood, right? Where his ass would be whooped if they knew he was Hispanic, bendito. So he grew up trying to just like not ruffle any feathers, trying to pass. And so then I feel that with this emergence, right, of Latino pride, a lot of people have felt more comfortable and say, pues pal carajo, I'm gonna sign, I'm gonna market, and I'm Hispanic, yes, and market. So do you feel that that's part of the equation?
I think that that is a huge part of the equation. I think that, and especially with this younger generation that's asking a lot of
Mm-hmm.
difficult questions that there's not any clear answers to. You have to dig deep. But yes, I do believe that Latinos are starting to come out. I believe that as more of us come out, it inspires more of us to come out, right? And then you have the other part of it, right, where you're starting to see people outside of our culture kind of getting curious. Hey, um,
Mhm.
why do you do this? Why do you do that? I really love this about your culture. I love this about your culture. So now you have not only, as you put it, closet Latinos coming out, but now you have closet non Latinos coming out to engage, to
Yeah.
I've had the comment so many times. I wish my family could be like yours, and I'm going. Well, you don't really know that. You just look at it from the outside. It looks fun, but man, we are a very intense group of people, and I don't know that you
Yes.
may want to engage that way, but
Exactly, right.
that's starting to
Because I be careful what you wish for. No, I'm just kidding.
happen.
Yeah, because it's the same, right? That whole idea of the mom wanting to talk to the doctor and ask questions, for her child that's over 18. And they're like, no, because HIPAA means, you can't, they need to give you permission. All of this, right? Like they have to sign off to share information. The same way is in our families, right? Nothing can happen here without then everybody, in New York, for example. I'm in Orlando, and if something happens, everybody will find out in a week, right? Everybody in like a week. Don't just like don't tell mommy because then everybody's gonna find out, right? Don't tell abuela because it's over, right? So,
But
and I
see,
think
that's
that's why
kind of
we're so secretive, right? When
yeah.
someone get that, which is part of actually the health part,
Hmm.
when one of our elders or someone in our families gets sick, they don't say anything, right? No le diga, don't say anything because we don't want everybody to worry, right? And so and that's part of the addressing health disparities is being more vocal, right? And sharing, what you're going through because they don't want to be a burden or whatever because we already know how it is, right? It's like, oh my God, if I tell people I'm ill, then it's like my house is gonna be full of cousins and aunts and I just need to process this right now, right? So that's
Sure.
part of it.
But
Mm-hmm.
you bring up a good point, right? So we talked about some of that disparity and some of those examples in health, but in business as well, right? So do we create space? Do we build equity? Because for me, if somebody in my family gets really sick, or if I have to go take care of them, or there's a big celebration, or una quinceañera, or whatever it is, companies are not sensitive to those things, and those are the things that are really important to us, right? So I have to be there. Hey, can I have Friday off? I'm going to travel. My niece is going to be 15, whatever. No, you can't have Friday. I mean, how do we build equity so that the things that are important to us are recognized? They don't have to be important to everyone, but at least it has to be recognized and acknowledged, right? And so how do you do that? How do you build equity with the Latino mom, single mom who has to pick up her child from childcare at 3 o'clock every day, right? So, do you build space so that she can come in early? Do you build space so that she can not take a lunch out? Whatever. How do you build the equity to be able to, so that people can live a quality life outside of work? Because the old model, and the pandemic has changed this. The old model was we work we live to work. And now, since the pandemic and everybody's scattered and worked from home and seen the value, and not everything is all colored roses from the pandemic and being at home, but a lot of people have realized and have re-engaged with their family, their friends, their marriages, whatever have you, and they're realizing that I shouldn't really live to work. I should work to live, right?
Right.
So it's shifting, and with that shift, employers, companies, organizations have to really understand that and figure out how do we make this work? Because if you don't, you're going to lose people. You're going to lose top talent, and
Absolutely.
you're going to lose customers as well. So
Yeah,
it's important.
totally. And it's really about understanding what's important to people, what they value, and then feel a little bit of empathy, right?
Right.
Also empathy about this. And I have an anecdote. I was once doing a training, and an executive, she was a white female, had an aha moment. She had a big aha moment, and because she had done the right thing in delivering access, right, uh, to relief and for her employee without realizing, right, that she was creating a more accessible and equitable work environment, for her to be able to thrive and flourish amidst a crisis. And I'll shortly explain. So she's the vice president of a company department. She had hired this Puerto Rican woman, actually, um to be her assistant. And for 2 years it was like bam bam, everything amazing. She's like, this was the most amazing assistant I've ever had in like the 25 years I've been in my career. And so all of a sudden the assistant calls her and says, VP, I need to resign. And she's like, what are you talking about? She's like, well, my aunt, right, that lives here in Orlando, is very ill, and I need to take her to therapy, right? She looks like she's gonna be okay, but it's 3 times a week, right, for the next 8 weeks, and I'm not gonna be able to do this. And this was like maybe 10 years ago. And the VP says, no, 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 wait a second, let me figure this out. So she goes to her team, right, to the other VPs, right, with her peers, and says, I can't let her go. And so, make a long story short, she came back because she couldn't understand. But does your aunt have kids? And he says, yeah, they're my cousins, but one of them lives in New York, the other one in California. I'm the one here. She's like my second mom. We grew up together in Puerto Rico, right? In the same town, like the house next door. And so it's my responsibility. And so the VP couldn't understand that. If she couldn't understand that dynamic, right? And so, make a long story short, she let her work for the 8 weeks remotely. Okay, the day she was taking her on to the therapy, and then the other day she had to come into the office. The other VPs were like, that's on you. If it doesn't work, you're setting a precedent. We wouldn't do that, right? But she said, screw it, I'm gonna do it because I can't lose her, right? She's a great employee. And the the VP tells me, and can I tell you, in those 8 weeks, she was the most productive. She was more productive, right, than she was. And I say, yes, because now you have a loyal employee. And I told the VP, and I said, and you don't understand, now you've become family to her. And she started crying, and she started crying in the middle of the workshop. She's like, what? And I'm like, you are now family to her. This woman owes you, right? Like, she feels like you went above and beyond because you kind of did, right? Considering the system, right? The broken system that doesn't afford this type of flexibility. And you did that for her, right? So that's it. Your familia. And so that's an example, right, of that, of what you just explained about pausing for a moment, right?
I will tell you that there is no greater power than to be able to have the people that work in your organization that work with you stop trading time for money and own the piece of the business. And the way to do that is to shift responsibility and confidence and becoming family. That's I don't think employees or employers understand the the the, the bond that's created when someone feels like they belong to your family, the corporate
Mm-hmm.
family. What happens is amazing. It's one of the greatest miracles I've ever seen, where an employee
Mm-hmm.
goes, no, I can't take off that day because I need to do this. I'm not going to go to the movies with you. Yeah, you could just call in sick. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm
Mm-hmm.
responsible. I belong here. There's a piece that I own. This is a very, very powerful thing. And that one act that your VP did transformed that assistant forever. And that person probably, if things stay the way they're going, she's going to work there forever. right?
Yeah.
And she's going to do the best possible job that she possibly can because there's a sense of commitment, family. There's a sense of ownership and belonging, and there's a sense of responsibility, right? Because as
Yeah.
Latinos, we are, when somebody does a favor for us, man, and I don't know what it is, but a lot of times it's like, oh, okay, now that person did this for me. I'm going to do all these things for them, right? So
Yeah.
the investment comes back tenfold, really.
Yes, absolutely. And so I just feel like in essence, right? From this conversation, and thank you so much for all of this insight. Multicultural marketing and advertising is about attracting, right? It's about attracting the people, but then DEI really helps you have them really show up. One thing is to attract, but then the other one's having them committed, right, to whatever you're doing. If it's a cause, if it's buying a product, if it's engaging with your services, whatever, they'll show up. If you're really
Absolutely.
embedding diversity, equity, and inclusion into how you operate. And so, yeah,
Sure.
I think this was fantastic.
Oh,
This
no,
was
thank
such a
you.
fantastic. Thank you so much, Joe.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Anytime. I appreciate. Keep doing what you're doing. You're doing amazing work.
And so are you. Thank you. And we need to talk offline, right? Because there's a lot of things
For sure.
brewing. So,
For sure.
okay. Okay, awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Que tengas un buen día.
Igualmente. Igualmente. Muchas gracias.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of I Have Something to Say, where subject matter experts are unafraid and unapologetic about sharing their perspectives regarding issues that impact our lives. They speak up because basically they give a shit. So if you're tired of canned answers and want to finally hear real people cut through the BS and talk about real issues, this is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Sami Heyman Marrero from Urbander, and behind our mixer is our producer, Chris Majoka from UdoU.